For the past few months, public schools all over the country have been going on strike. Many people are not aware just how widespread this has been. It's not a nationwide concerted effort for a singular purpose. They each have their own agendas. Some strikes have actually been statewide in places, but there's plenty more at the local level. West Virginia and Colorado teachers were looking for higher pay and better health benefits. Oklahoma, Arizona, and North Carolina teachers want higher pay and more funding for education. In Kentucky, they want to stop the state from passing pension reform. Now, this one's a little different. When I first heard about it, the way I understood the story was that the state was taking away the teachers' pensions, which would be pretty messed up. But upon further examination, I found that that wasn't the case at all. Kentucky has a pension crisis, like many other states. They owe $43.4 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. Now, it would suck if they were to say, you know what, we're just not going to pay it. But that's not what they did. They did what a lot of businesses have been doing and started switching the incoming teachers to a 401k type retirement plan. They're still planning to honor all the pensions that were already in place. They just want to quit making the problem bigger. There's another problem with that strategy that some companies are going to run into real soon if they haven't already. It doesn't keep people loyal to the company. Employees are able to take their 401k wherever and whenever they feel like getting a job somewhere else. But this wouldn't be a problem for the teachers. It would be liberating. It would give the school system more of a reason to keep the teachers happy, otherwise they could just leave. But anyway, there are strikes in other places. National City in California held a strike. Louisiana was taking polls to see if they wanted to have a strike. And down in Florida, instead of going on strike, the schools are suing the state. Now, the news has reported that school spending has been flat for the past 10 years, or even cut, as was apparently the case in Arizona. But that isn't really what's going on. For the most part, it's absolutely true that teacher salary has been abysmally stagnant. But that's not the fault of the greedy taxpayers. The fact is, per pupil spending has gone up around 30% in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Oklahoma over the past 2 decades. But where's all the extra money going? Well, it's going to expensive benefits packages, ballooning pensions, and an ever-growing number of non-teaching staff. Total compensation for teachers has risen faster than inflation when you consider insurance and retirement. Of course, there was the devastating effect Obamacare has had on an already corrupt healthcare system. But the school system has tried to make up for some of those deficiencies with increased taxpayer spending on teacher healthcare. But pensions are another story. The average taxpayer gets $1.78 in pension benefits per hour worked. The average teacher receives $6.22 in retirement benefits per hour worked. And that's what I'm talking about with Kentucky. They're paying out so much in pension that they're $43.4 billion in the hole. If the state wasn't having to pay all that debt, Kentucky teachers' salary would be increased by $11,400 a year. But that's not the teacher's fault. If you're fortunate enough to get a pension, that's great. I know people getting pensions from public schools, and I think that's wonderful. I know I'd be thrilled to be getting a pension, but if the source of my pension was $43.4 billion in the hole, I'd be pretty nervous. And I'd be wondering what they were going to do to fix the situation before they were forced to start cutting my pension. But maybe that's just me. The real problem here is how the business is run. And business is something the government has no business trying to run. One of the most successful businesses our government has ever run has been the post office. Since the days of the Pony Express, the U.S. Postal Service has had one mission: to deliver your mail anywhere in the country, and they've been pretty efficient at it. They physically reach every home and business in the country every day but Sunday for really cheap. And over the decades, they've managed to get faster and cheaper. As this article points out, the Postal Service is failing because, 1, they're restricted from changing their business practices, and 2, they're restricted from raising the prices. And these restrictions come from Congress, which was a group of people interested only in short-term popularity contests and not long-term strategic business success. They get to save their voters money at the post office because they can say no whenever they ask to raise the prices. But then they raise your taxes to pay off some of the massive debt they're having to pay off with the post office operating cost. You know who is interested in making money over the long term, and they're doing it by making the customer happy? FedEx, UPS, DHL. But if the government wants the U.S. Postal Service to be successful against private companies, the only tool they have is to pass laws restricting competition. When the government can't compete in business, which is always, they have to restrict or eliminate the competition, which robs us, the consumers, the citizens, the taxpayers, of innovation and economic advantages of competition. So what about the competition for public schools? First, look at the cost. Most people consider the cost to be free since it's paid for by the government, which is a mistake. The government has no money of its own. It takes every penny it has from us, except for the money it borrows, which is taken from our children and their children. In California, school funding comes from the state at 57%, 29% comes from property taxes, and then the other 14% comes from other local sources. In the 45 states with sales tax, you pay for the public schools every time you buy something. And property taxes don't just affect homeowners, it drives up prices for renters. And then there's the lottery. I had a discussion with someone who felt public schools could be funded entirely through the lottery, so I looked into it. In 2016, lottery sales totaled $80.55 billion. $22.57 billion, or 28% of that, went to state and local government. If you were to assume that the government didn't take a cut from that money, that would be $321 per kid per year, or about 2% of the total per kid cost of public schools. We spend about $12,000 to $25,000 per kid per year on the public school system. But the average price for a year of private school is $7,770 for elementary and $13,000 for high school. It is, of course, possible to find private school for $30,000 a year or more, but the vast majority of private school options fall well below or half the cost of the cheapest public schools in the country, according to data from the National Center for Education Statistics. Another thing about the private schools is that the parents tend to be more involved. They're spending their own money directly, so they have a bigger stake in the school. And as the customer, why wouldn't they have a say in what goes on in the private school? Have you ever been involved with a school with a bully problem? Public schools are very limited in what they can do about bullying. I've seen instances where faculty seem to think they should just ignore the problem away. Frustrated parents end up removing their kids from public school in a desperate attempt to keep their kids safe. And the children end up in a private school, and voila, problem solved. But even so, in the eyes of many Americans, public school still seems to be cheaper because it's free. The idea that taxes are theft can be a difficult concept to grasp without serious examination. But even imagining that the public schools are free, this article from Time.com posits that sending your kids to private school can actually cost you less than public school. So the logic goes like this. Many of us let the quality of the school system play a large part in dictating what neighborhood we'll live in. In districts where even the rich people send their kids to public school, suggesting that the quality of the school is especially high, can cost more than twice the national average per square foot to live in. So if you make the decision to live in a more affordable neighborhood, the money you save on the cost of living and rent and mortgage would more than cover the cost to send your children to a private school. Pretty smart. So private schools operate cheaper and with better quality than public schools, as is the case with pretty much any business when compared to a government entity. But what about the poor? Not everyone can afford even a few $1,000s a year. Now, my solution to that would be charity. There are always plenty of people willing to donate to a child's education. Churches, community, businesses, rich people. And they'll do it voluntarily. That's the difference between charity and taxes. But if you're still not convinced that charity could be voluntary, let the government give vouchers to the poor to select the private school they're choosing. They'd get better quality for less of our tax dollars. The recipient families would be empowered to take an active role in the child's education instead of being stuck with what they get after the tax dollars get filtered through the bureaucracy. And while we're at it, why not pass this voucher money on to parents who take the time to homeschool their kids? If enough people were incentivized to make their own choices for their child's education, the demand for public school would get smaller and smaller. I watched a video by Joshua Katz called Toxic Culture of Education. In it, he described how private education companies such as Pearson and McGraw-Hill poured millions of dollars into lobbying the government to pass legislation to shape the standards and requirements that govern how public schools are run. It's a really good video and I do recommend watching it. But he came just short of a good solution. He actually described a good solution and said that he hated it. The problem was that he put the blame on private education companies for the failures of the public education. Now, it's true that these companies found ways to put profits ahead of the quality of education for our kids. But that's what businesses do. They're in it to make money. That's what their shareholders demand, and that's not going to change. But the factor that makes companies turn out a quality product is customer demand. So who's the customer? Is it the parents? Well, no. It is their money, but they don't get to decide how to spend it. It's the government who's making the decisions. And if the private companies can manipulate the government with lobbyists, they will. So now the politicians are making money off the lobbyists, the private companies are making money, and we're stuck with the consequences. The solution Joshua did not like was to completely defund public education, to give back the $750 billion of taxpayer money that are going toward education, which is just under $15,000 for every K through 12 kid in America, which could definitely get you a decent private school education. But instead, the solution he offered was to double down on public education. But while I was watching, all I could do was shake my head, because this is something I see over and over again. When the solutions given by our government are not working, people say they want more. They want the government to do more. That's not a good answer. People still want to blame big business, but if the businesses were beholden to the parents, who are the proper customers, then they would be forced to give us what we want, or we'd take our business elsewhere. The only reason the companies are giving us crappy products is that the government empowers them to do whatever they want. If you take that power away from the government, then the lobbyists can't manipulate them. Take the government out of the equation and give the freedom of choice back to the parents, so that freedom of choice can drive the free market toward lower prices and better quality. That's just how the free market works. So what's to be done with public schools? Get rid of them.